If I can do it, then you can do it. Hello everyone, I'm Susan, your friendly neighborhood miniaturist, and today I'm doing a tutorial on how to solder. Now some of you might know that I posted a soldering video before, Susan versus soldering iron. It was my first attempt at soldering. It's entertaining to watch, but it's by no means a tutorial. Since then, I have sat down with my friend Leo, who not only soldered for his job all of his life, but he is also a model train aficionado and has done quite a bit of soldering for his HO scale layout. Actually, once I got some basic instruction from Leo, I realized how easy it is to solder well, when before I thought it was this big, daunting, scary thing, this soldering stuff. And so stick around and you'll see how easy it is too. So first I'll go over some of the supplies that we will be using. The first is that I will show you my soldering iron. I use the Isotip Quick Charge. Here's the box for it. Model 7700, rechargeable. It does include a couple of tips, the standard fine tip and the standard heavy duty tip, but I actually also bought from them their micro tip, part number 7566 and then 100. The micro tip makes a big difference because it's so small. It works really well for the really small wires. The second thing that I have here is Kester solder. Kester brand solder. This is 44-inch, 0.75 millimeter solder. It usually comes in like an orange or yellow label. This is rosin core. Helps to keep your wiring from corroding over time. Otherwise, you may want to be thinking about rosining your solder by hand, which requires a liquid or a paste. And I think this is actually a Canadian company, so that's cool. You also want some heat sleeves. I think they're called heat sleeves, soldering sleeves. Leo gave me a handful. Obviously you can see there's a bunch of different colors, a bunch of different diameters. You'll want one that's pretty close to your wire, but big enough to go over the area that you're soldering. So it's good to have a few different sizes to choose from. And then of course today we need something to solder. So we will be soldering, this is a kit, a 12-string light kit, warm white LEDs from Evan Designs, which I love their lighting kits and stuff. I use them all the time. So this actually comes with your sleeve for your soldering in it, which is nice. The lights, and then of course the battery pack that you will be soldering the lights to. So let's open it up. First thing we are gonna do before we solder is we're gonna take our sleeves and put them over, I'm gonna put them over the battery, and you do not want to forget your sleeve. That's the number one problem with the soldering, is getting everything all soldered up and then realizing you forgot your protective sleeves. We are actually going to be joining the red strand of this to the red here, which means that the darker color, which is green, will join with the black. Now, before I do that, I'm going to demonstrate with these ends, because they're a little bit bigger, a couple acceptable ways to join these wires together before you go in with your solder. So the first is to make a couple of little like shepherd's crook candy cane looking kind of hooks. Oh, you might want it to be a bit longer than that. Like this. And then just sort of hook them together, sort of barrel of monkeys style. Like that. And then what you would want to do then after that is to go in with like, a pair of pliers and really, squish those closed, right? So that you have a really tight connection. You would just close these up really, I'm not going to do it right now, but you just close these up really tight with a pair of tweezers, and that's perfectly acceptable if kind of mechanical way to join. But you can absolutely do that, especially if you have trouble with some fine motor skills with your fingers. That is no problem. You can definitely join them that way. What I like to do is sort of join them in an X. And I sort of imagine like, can't really see in the camera, This kind of like wrist grabbing, like type of thing. That's sort of what I'm thinking of when I put these together. So I'll actually sort of cross them about where they cross in the middle. And then I'll just twist them kind of around each other. You'll see what I mean when we're done here. See, and then you get a sort of nice, really sturdy, like you may not even really need to solder that if you did it nice and tight, but to be on the safe side against damage. But anyway, so that's kind of the twisty, one of them twists this way, the other twists this way, and then that's a good way to join them too. So I'm just gonna undo that. And that's the type of join that I'm gonna do with our smaller wires. And this wire is quite small, you see, compared to this one. But that's the type of join I'm gonna do. So because the small wire on this is so tiny and flexible, I'm going to mostly just wrap that one around the thicker one. Just kind of metal to metal. There we go, make sure the end's kind of tucked around there. That looks pretty good. There. It's pretty nice and tight. And then we're gonna double check that our sleeve is still on the other side and didn't slide off when we weren't looking. Then we'll do the green to the black. One nice sturdy join is the way to start. We're ready to put a little solder on this. It's nice to have on hand a damp paper towel to sort of wipe your the tip of your soldering iron on. Don't do it on dry paper towel because then you're running into fire risk, but make sure it's nice and dampened, or you can use a dampened sponge is probably the better choice. And that'll help you kind of keep your tip clean as you go along. I brought a little bowl of water out, but I'm just gonna dampen the paper towel here and leave it, it's off to the side here, you can't really see it, but I'm gonna leave it there. You can get like helping hands that are like a little clip system that sits on a stand. It'll hold these for you in a way that's sturdy. I don't own that, so we're just going to use a couple metal clips just to keep things from swinging around too much. If you are using the IsoTip quick charge like I am, there is a lock button and a use button. So you want to put the dial around to use, and then you press this down and you'll see a light kind of comes on at the end. Which is nice about this particular soldering iron is it does actually help light kind of like your wires while you're, I don't know if you can see that very well. Now this is the trick that I appreciated the most, which was to hold the solder on top of the wire and then put the soldering iron, I'm gonna move this a little central, put the soldering iron underneath of the wire, okay? So let's just, I'm gonna hold down the button and let it warm up a little bit. I'm just gonna test it on the end of the solder until it looks like it's hot enough and it's melting good. Oh, I just want a little more liquid. Okay, and then we're just gonna set the solder on top of the wire and use the tip underneath to melt it. Just like that. And then again, when you can see you might have a glob of solder on the end of your, just heat it up. Keep your soldering iron hot and just rub the tip against your wet sponge or your piece of paper towel that's wetted up. It's hard to talk and do this at the same time. I probably put a little bit more, even some more solder on there than I needed to. It is looking a little chunky. All you really need to do is use it to sort of fill the gaps in the wire. Let's do our second wire. Heat that up a little bit. Solder on top, soldering iron in the bottom. Just gently rub along. There. Looks pretty good. Keep the heat on for a minute and just wipe that off. I think you can do a more thorough cleaning of the tips of your soldering iron with like a little bit of steel wool or something. Don't quote me on that. Take a look online. I'm sure you'll find lots of information on maintenance. I haven't had this very long, so I haven't had and used it terribly often, so I haven't had to do much maintenance on it. Here's our second solder. Again, I'm probably being a little bit liberal with the solder. If you piled on too much, you'd have trouble with your sleeve fitting over, but obviously we don't have any trouble here. The sleeve is nice and big. So how do we heat this sleeve so that it shrinks down a little bit around our soldered joint and stays put? So that's the next thing. And we can use our soldering iron again for that. You could use a heat gun, but most of us, well, some of us anyway, don't have that kind of specialized equipment. So what I would like to do, what I usually do and what Leo has suggested is also possible, is kind of, now you gotta be careful with your fingers here. Also, I should have said this at the beginning, disclaimer, I take no responsibility if you set something on fire while you're doing this, or set yourself on fire, or burn your fingers. Like, proceed at your own risk when you do this tutorial. But basically what I'll do is I'll use the soldering iron, I'll heat it up again. But this barrel side, not the tip, but this barrel side also gets hot. And I'm gonna use that as a sort of like iron, like a clothing iron. And use the heat from the side of that to help shrink our sleeve. So I'm gonna heat that up a little bit like we did before, pressing down the button, just kind of waiting a few minutes. But as it gets hotter, now watch your fingers, but basically just slide it along, almost like you're sort of just rubbing it lightly, and you'll see that it's shrinking up. See how that part is more shrunk up than this part, and it's watching your fingers now. It's still sliding a little bit, but eventually when you get it shrunk down to kind of a smaller, you can go slowly on this, eventually it won't slide anymore. That's good. So I will just sort of shrink down this side that I didn't get to, because my fingers are in the way. There we go. And then one more little once over. So basically, like, all you want is the fact that this won't, oh, I got a little solder on there. That's all right. All you want is so that this won't slide. And that's not sliding, so it's nice and tight. Oh, I got a little bit of wire sticking at the end there. I don't think that's a big issue. We'll be all right. All right, and then we'll do the sleeve for the other side. There could have probably been a slightly smaller, like I could have used one of my smaller diameter sleeves. This is probably a little bit bigger than it needs to be, but it shows that if it's not, exact, you can make it work still. I might go over it a little bit more off camera, but that is the general idea there. So once we have that joined, I've got my batteries. This light system takes, ooh, I'll take that off. This light system takes a couple of AAA batteries. So the moment of truth, before you install your lights, you always should check, put the batteries in them, make sure that the switch is working. Oh my goodness, that was scary there for a minute. Whew. I wasn't pressing the switch hard enough. All right, there we go, lit up. A couple of bonus tips before you go. The first is that in the process of wiping off your soldering iron on the paper towel, you may end up loosening the connection somewhat up here, and then your soldering iron may not get hot, and you're like, why is it not getting hot? Just go in with like, I mean, not your finger because it might still be a little hot, but go in with like a pair of tweezers or something and just really just jam that back into the body, right? Just to make sure that it's really sturdy in there. Second bonus tip is if you need to undo the solder, say you forgot your sleeve and now you have to undo the solder, go in and use the heat on your soldering iron, heat up the solder, and then wipe it with a wet paper towel. And you might have to do that a few times to get the solder off. The other thing you can do if you have the length is, of course, to cut and, cut the piece out and strip your wire and, start over again. But you can remove solder to some degree by heating up the soldering iron, using that to heat up your solder, and then going in with your wet paper towel and wiping away the liquefied solder. And then finally, your third bonus tip is you can actually also use the soldering iron to strip wire. So if you have a wire and it just ends, like this, and there's no bare wire to wrap around the wire next to you, you can actually heat up your soldering iron and lay it down and just sort of use the heat in the tip to sort of like scrape, kind of like peeling a carrot, scraping the plastic off. I wish I had a wire that was like this so I could demonstrate, but I don't right now. Maybe it's something, if I think of doing it later, I can do a little short addendum. but you can use this hot tip. Make sure you use your wet paper towel to wipe off the tip of your soldering iron really well. But you can sort of use it when it's nice and hot, and just sort of like, even like loosening it, like twirling it around and kind of loosening it a bit. It'll come off in one kind of chunk, but otherwise you can just sort of do the carrot peeling, scraping motion, and loosen and slide off the plastic. And then you have the bare wire that you can wrap around the other bare wire to do your soldering, as you saw.
And there you have it. I hope that this video was helpful for you and that your soldering projects go off without a hitch now. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to get more tutorial videos. I am going to be making YouTube one of my main priorities this year and in the coming years, so stay tuned for hopefully a lot more tutorial videos. Let me know in the comments if there's something in particular that you'd like to see in a video, whether there's some information that you'd like to know, whether there's some techniques that you've seen but nobody has really explained. If you're new to the Dollhouse Miniatures world, welcome, and let me know where you're at with getting started and where you might need some help. Until next time, take care of yourself and don't drink the paint water. A video tutorial on how to solder. How to solder.